Welcome back to MMA Al Dente. I am the guy who picked Royler Gracie to defeat Genki Sudo. And I'm here to preview UFC Fight Night 245, otherwise known as UFC Vegas 99, otherwise known as UFC Fight Night Hernandez versus Pereira. Fucking kill me now. Okay, opening up the card is Austin Lane versus Rebellis Despaigne. My prediction for this fight is Despaigne wins by knockout. And we'll go with him winning in round one, considering his average victory takes about 8 seconds. Still, I think he's a very limited fighter, and he's going to be incredibly hard to trust in his UFC career, in any MMA fight, to be honest. But here, I suppose I'm as confident as I could be where he's fighting Austin Lane. Because Austin Lane is another limited fighter. And by limited, I mean he's probably twice as good as Despaigne is on the ground. But I still don't think he's good enough to exploit that and make that disadvantage the story of the fight. I think Austin Lane might have one good takedown in him. I said that when he fought Jonathan Denise, and it's one of the few things I've ever been right about. But he had one good takedown and got some good control, but that was it. His wrestling was dissipating after he hit that first takedown, and there was nothing left in round two, and he was put away. I also don't think Austin Lane has the takedown cardio to be in Despaigne's face and take him down like Waldo Cortez Acosta did. I just don't have that much faith in Austin Lane. But I've never seen Rebellis Despaigne outlast anybody in MMA. I've never seen him come alive after grappling exchanges. Again, he's just had the one loss where he was neutralized. And every other victory of his, you add them all up and they might add up to like 3 minutes or whatever. He just doesn't have that much MMA experience. So my point is, I won't even reach for props with Rebellis Despaigne. I'm sure they're going to be all over the knockout line, and it won't be worth it. But that is his path to victory, so it's something I'll look for at the very least. However, I'm very sure I won't be betting on it. And on the flip side, Austin Lane, he's the more versatile guy with 3 times the experience, and he comes close to matching the size of Despaigne, which I don't know if that helps or hurts him, to be honest. But he's such a limited guy himself that I don't even think I'll go reaching for anything on his side. I think I'm just going to stay away from this. Hope Austin Lane is able to win and do so with grappling. I'd like to see him get that victory. But I've got to pick Rebellis Despaigne here. I think the fight I envision is a round one knockout without any takedowns. I think Austin Lane, of course, is going to be trying to strike his way into a takedown. I know that's the game plan. But I think Rebellis just needs a small window of striking for his danger to meet the vulnerable chin of Austin Lane. And I think he gets that victory. The prediction is it happens in round one and it happens in the first 2 minutes of the fight. But I think even if Austin Lane is able to take him to the ground, it still ends up looking similar to Jonathan Denise versus Austin Lane, where I think where Austin Lane starts to fall apart a little bit, cardio wise. Rebellis is still going to be that dangerous and fighting a guy who is quite vulnerable in Lane, and there's only one way that ends, and it's Austin Lane via triangle choke. You heard it here first, folks. Now I'm going with Despaigne via knockout, and like I said, no bets for this one until I get drunk and start tossing around sprinkles. Next up, we have Melissa Martinez versus Alice Ardelean. My prediction for the fight is Alice wins a decision. I think she's going to have a hard time catching Melissa at first. I know Melissa's going to have an advantage on the feet. I mean, she's such a faster striker. And I'm talking about her strikes, but also her movement. She moves around really well. And I think Alice is going to be playing catch up at first. But I do envision her catching up and eventually making this fight more about strength and power as opposed to speed and movement and striking. But I will say, look, Alice Ardelean has never been knocked out, first of all, and she's shown a willingness to bang and get in a firefight when she's felt she's needed to, and she's definitely not afraid of that. So, and also I have to say on the feet, while I think she's far less dangerous altogether than Melissa Martinez with her sharp strikes and kicks, I still think Alice hits harder, punch for punch. And of course, a crucial moment in Melissa Martinez's one loss was her getting dropped by Elise Reed in round one there. Still, though, I don't think that's really a path to success or too much success at all for Alice. I think the path to victory here is getting on top of Melissa, because that's really the story of the loss to Elise Reed. Was round three, where Melissa, I think, hopefully through cardio or whatever, but she started making some bad decisions, and she initiated clinches with Elise Reed, who was able to rough her up and take over in round three. But that's her only loss. However, I have to say, before that, the last victory she had was over Desiree Yanez, and that was another fight in which she was being bullied around on the ground, taken down early, and taken down and mounted for a good chunk in the middle of the fight. And she really had to scratch and claw for that victory, but it did show that there's a lot that's left to be desired on the ground and takedown defense in the first place for Melissa Martinez as well. But yeah, those are her two most recent fights, and her one loss happened in her last fight, which was 2 years ago. I have to say, she's only 27 years old, so she's made a lot of improvements, I'm sure, in her last 2 years. Hopefully, a lot of it in takedown defense, if not size and strength, and the rest of it. Because even though she may be more of a natural atom weight, the UFC is not adding an atom weight division. So she's a 115er. But Alice Ardelean, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about her 6 losses. She's got 9-6 record is not pretty at all, but 5 of those 6 losses are to good fighters. That's the first point I want to make. Secondly, I want to say she's only been beaten once in the last 8 years, and that was in her last fight to Shauna Bannon. So all these other losses, all 5 other losses take place over 8 years ago, in fact. And the only 2 girls that ever put her away, and both of them did so by submission, are UFC fighters. Deanna Belbita, all right, former UFC fighter, but she got her out of there with her armbar, which is an excellent move of hers, and Weili Zhang, current fucking champion, rear naked choked her in the second round 8 years ago. So she's a tough girl. I still think so, despite her having been finished twice and having seen her again in firefights. She's thrown down when she's needed to and whatever. I think she's going to be very tough to get out of there in the first place. But also, like I said, there's only one loss of these 6 losses that you could say is a bad loss on paper. But most of the girls that beat her way back when were still solid fighters. And most of them were UFC fighters at one point or another. So that explains away her losses of the past. But her most recent loss was to Shauna Bannon, and it was a tight decision, split decision. I thought Shauna won, but I do think Alice made it a close fight, and she was able to secure takedowns and get top control. But her takedown, her wrestling wasn't there for her in round 3. Now, I believe she took that fight on very short notice. Like, very, very short notice. Definitely within a week. So, not being at your best in round 3 is very forgivable there. So, I don't hold that against her. And I still think she handled herself well in her first UFC fight, even though it was a loss. Really, both girls did. But here, I'm favoring Alice because I think she's going to be able to close the distance on Melissa and rough her up on the inside, bully her around with physical strength. And the fight I envision is her winning rounds 2 and 3 by doing that after having a tough round 1 chasing after Martinez. She is a slight underdog at plus 125. I'll be honest, I have not bet on her yet because I guess it isn't my most confident underdog pick. But she's an underdog, and I'll bet on her. I'll ruin a parlay with that. But yeah, I'm going with Alice Ardelean. She's not the most reliable fighter either. It's not like she's got the deepest resume as far as her victories go. Like I said, her losses are against the more high profile opponents. But I still like the way she's handled herself in losses. And even though a lot of her wins are her forcing finishes, I envision her slowing things down with her skills here and grinding out a hard earned decision victory. Up next, we have Elise Reed versus Jessica Penne. My prediction for this fight is Elise Reed wins by decision. The basis for the prediction is that I don't think Jessica Penne has the wrestling to exploit what I think is a big advantage for her on the ground. And on the flip side, even though I think Jessica Penne is very much in the realm of winning a kickboxing bout on points on the feet, I still think Elise Reed has an advantage there. Not nearly as big as Jessica's advantage on the ground, but it is an advantage, and that's what I've got her winning this fight with. I think she's the sharper striker. She's probably the more powerful puncher between the two. And I also think her leg kicks are going to be a valuable weapon in this fight. And I've got her duplicating some of the success of Emily Ducote, let's say, and winning a kickboxing bout by decision. Speaking of which, these girls have lost a bunch, and most of them are via finish. I should address these losses first. Elise Reed lost 4 times. All 4 of them are finishes, and they all take place on the ground. She was submitted twice and TKO'd twice. Say Jessica Penne, even though she hasn't been the most imposing fighter on the ground in the UFC since she's been in the UFC, she's gotten wins here and there with it. But I still think if she was to find herself there with Elise Reed, she would have a big advantage, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if it ended with Elise Reed tapping to an armbar. But Jessica Penne's been finished a few times as well. She's got 7 losses. She's been finished in 4 of them. Submitted twice and knocked out twice, just like Reed. Her knockout losses are standing. They come to Jessica Andrade and Joanna Jędrzejczyk in her first title defense, I believe. Those are 2 of the best fighters and strikers and most dangerous fighters, and there's no shame getting finished by them. Penne was just overwhelmed in both those fights. But she did take a beating, too. And the 2 times she was submitted, it's not even worth talking about. But yeah, she was submitted twice. Elise Reed's not going to submit her. If anybody's getting tapped, it's Elise Reed here. But yeah, she's been finished in 4 of her 7 losses. And like I said, I could explain away all these finishes, but now she is a 42-year-old, or about to be a 42-year-old. She's coming off a year and a half layoff. So a lot of circumstances against Penne. A finish isn't completely out of the question. But of course, Elise Reed isn't the best finisher anyway. She's only got 2 of them. 5 of her 7 wins are by decision, and that's the expectation here. This one is, if she wins, it's by decision. I'd be more confident in a finish if Jessica Penne was to win. I'd say, yeah, that'd be much more likely to end with a finish. But still, I think this one is a kickboxing bout. I don't think there's a lot of ground action at all. And on the feet, despite having some physical traits and the rest of it, Elise Reed's the sharper striker, and she's also the healthier fighter at 31 years old or whatever. I think she's going to be faster. I think she's going to chop down Penne, who's not an agile fighter like Melissa Martinez. I think the kicks will be available here, and I think Elise Reed slows her down, and her boxing, of course, plays a role, and she wins a decision. Elise Reed by decision is the pick. I've bet on Elise Reed. Nothing big, though. I'll wait for the props, of course, because I'm very sure if she does win, it is by decision. And we'll see if anything else opens up. Up next, we have Tamiris Vidal versus Jocelyn Edwards. My prediction for this fight is Edwards wins by decision. I think it'll be a pretty tight decision. And that's why I wouldn't even bet on her prop bets, let alone her money line, which is sitting at minus 250 right now. And I think it's pretty wide. I envision this one being a close fight. And I think either girl can win with 2 takedowns, to be honest, and winning a decision. But I am picking Edwards to win because she is the more refined fighter. I think she's the cleaner striker for sure. But also Vidal just seems to have a lot of weaknesses. I think she can be taken down and controlled, which is really either girl's biggest weakness, I'd say. That they can be taken down and controlled. That's the majority of Jocelyn Edwards' losses. And also for Vidal, I guess it's the majority of her losses. Vidal, let me start with her. She's got 3 losses, 1 TKO, 1 submission, and 1 decision. The decision was against Montserrat Rendon in the UFC last year, where it was a close fight, but ultimately she allowed herself to be taken down in the second half of that fight, and that was the story of the loss. Against Melissa Gatto in her last fight, she ended up getting finished on the feet with a body punch, really a punch to the tit. But that was still a fight in which she conceded a lot of top control as well. Melissa Gatto is a beast of a grappler, was able to take her down. But I don't consider that a major weakness against her chin or her tit or whatever anyway, by the way. I don't think that's something we're going to see again. So that's just something that kind of happened. But in that TKO loss, she did get taken down a few times. And her loss by submission way back when was to Carol Hossa, which is very forgivable, but it was an arm triangle choke in round 3. So yeah, the ground game has been where she's been defeated, neutralized, or even finished. Jocelyn Edwards, she's got 6 losses, only one of which is by finish, and that was an armbar 10 years ago. And she actually avenged that loss with an armbar herself a year later. But since then, she's lost 5 times, every one of them in the UFC or at the UFC level. And in the majority of them, the story of the loss has been that she was taken down repeatedly. Carol Hossa and Sarah Alpar. And I do think Vidal may not have that type of overall wrestling attack, but I know she's physically strong enough to take down anybody. And I believe she's definitely in the realm of winning this fight. I do favor Edwards because she's got twice the experience, almost literally. You double Tamires Vidal's record, and it looks very similar to Jocelyn Edwards' record. And Edwards, again, her durability is there for her at the UFC level. She's definitely a hustler. She's got good cardio, or I definitely wouldn't call it bad cardio. She hasn't won every round 3. But I think she's definitely the more refined fighter. I think she's much more comfortable on the feet than Vidal. Vidal is dangerous, perhaps more dangerous. I mean, she's only knocked out one person ever, but it was a jumping switch knee to the body on Ramona Pasquale in her UFC debut. And she probably even hits harder, punch for punch, than Jocelyn Edwards. And I do think she's got speed on her side as well. She moves better and she's probably overall faster. But the striking is not up to par with Jocelyn Edwards. I think Jocelyn Edwards is better. I think Jocelyn Edwards would win the kickboxing bout without any grappling at all between the two of them. And I also think I just trust Jocelyn Edwards a little more to out hustle her, even mixing in the takedowns. We've seen that from Jocelyn Edwards against Nora Cornale, a fight she definitely should have won, by the way. But that should have been the difference as well, her grappling. And I think here, at the very least, her and her coaches have seen the fights with Tamires Vidal getting taken down by Montserrat Rendon and Melissa Gatto. And I'm sure it's occurred to them that it's a potential avenue to score some points here. So yeah, I'm going with Edwards. Just seen a little more from her, and I trust more of her to hustle to a decision victory, but not a lot of confidence at all. Definitely not enough to bet. I just going to be resisting the urge to bet on Tamires Vidal. Next up, we have Jean Matsumoto versus Brad Katona. My prediction for this fight is Katona wins by decision. And of course, I have bet on him. He's a plus 220 underdog right now. And I will look to bet more on him once I see everything that's available. I got him winning because I think, first of all, he's very tough to get out of there. He's never been finished. And he's got excellent cardio. And all this makes him a great point fighter, which is what he is. He's an excellent point fighter, Brad Katona. And I envision him being in John Matsumoto's face and taking him down a few times to win this one on points. He may not have the overall wrestling of Dan Argueta, and he doesn't. Dan was able to take down John Matsumoto a few times there. But I do think Brad Katona is much better than Dan on the feet with his striking, and he still has excellent wrestling as well. And I think he will be able to get John Matsumoto down. Matsumoto, look, it's not like he hasn't faced any adversity. He's 15-0, and he's been through it all already. He's been knocked down, knocked around a bunch. He's been taken down. His last fight against Dan Argueta, I don't know how many times he was taken down, but Dan was all over him. And he's always had an answer. And a lot of times he figures his opponent out, and his answer is a choke. His last 3 finishes all come with a guillotine choke. Of course, none are more impressive than his win over Dan Argueta, because he got that guillotine with 1 second left in round 2, which just shows he keeps that danger. He's not somebody who's going to let his submission prowess slip. He's still a threat down the stretch. And even the guy Luan Danger that he beat 5 fights ago, whatever, he got him out of there with a guillotine choke. That was at the very end of round 2 as well. So there's no doubt in anything with John Matsumoto. He's got cardio. He's got danger. He's got some excellent chokes. And he's got a lot of heart and whatever as well. He's been knocked around. 2 guys I've seen have knocked him down and hurt him. And one guy took his back, and he's been through it all. And he's had an answer for everybody, and he's 15-0. So there's no real major doubt in John Matsumoto, aside from the fact that all this shit can happen to him. He can be clipped and taken down and the rest of it. And I think Brad Katona is such a versatile, refined fighter who is unlikely to give John Matsumoto any big moments on the scorecards. And I think Brad will win this fight with a hustle and by getting in his face and outgrinding him for a decision victory. I have to mention John Matsumoto has been finished as an amateur once, and it was a rear naked choke, I believe, in 30 seconds or something. So just know that I know that happened. Brad Katona, of course, does have 3 submissions, and he's more reliable with his submissions down the stretch. I think the majority of his wins come in round 3. But the majority of his wins altogether are by decision, and that is what I see happening here. I think it would really surprise me, really, if either guy got finished. Of course, I said that same exact shit about Dan Argueta, and he ended up getting finished. But I do think that speaks more to the danger of Jean Matsumoto and his chokes as opposed to the submission defense or lack thereof of Dan Argueta. I think this guy, Jean Matsumoto, is just a really dangerous guy, and he's got a very high ceiling. But again, Brad Katona, it's not like he's got any major weakness. He's got 3 losses, but he's never been finished, never been knocked out or submitted. His last loss was to Garrett Armfield. Still a close enough fight, but I did think he was out hustled. And that one really surprised me, to be honest. But his other 2 losses before that were in back-to-back fights, his last 2 fights of his first UFC stint, where he lost a tight decision to Hunter Azure and a more lopsided decision to Marab. No shame there. But yeah, he's the guy that typically wins by decisions. Brad Katona, that's how he won 2 Ultimate Fighters. And I have to mention his epic win over Cody Gibson last year. They went to war in the finale of the Ultimate Fighter. But that's the perfect fight to showcase all the traits of Brad Katona, because I thought he really put his foot on the gas in the end there and kind of stepped ahead of Cody Gibson in that fight. But he's still beaten many great fighters in the past. That first UFC stint is almost 6 years ago, even over 6 years ago now at this point. So he's been fighting good fighters for a while. And in that, those two underrated exhibition wins that aren't on his record from that first UFC stint are over Bryce Mitchell, who he submitted with a rear naked choke, and Kyler Phillips, who is on this card and favored to beat Rob Font. So yeah, Brad Katona's got a lifetime of experience. I know they on paper it's similar experience, but experience is definitely on Brad's side. And at 32 years old in his prime, again never finished in the rest of it, I'm taking him to out hustle Jean Matsumoto. Brad Katona by decision is the pick. I bet on his money line and I'll wait for the props. And I'll probably waste money on everybody winning a fucking submission. Next up we have Almabaev versus Mateusz Nicolai. My prediction for this fight, and I say this with no confidence whatsoever, is Mateusz Nicolai wins by decision. The basis for the prediction is that I think his chin, which is the biggest liability in this fight, or in any other fight really, his chin is not such a big factor in this matchup. I mean, Almabaev, he does have a few TKO finishes, one of which is a beautiful knockout in round 3 and over a decent fighter, by the way. But he's still not Mr. Knockout. He's much more of a grappling threat, and I don't think he's likely to knock out Mateusz Nicolai. Although I'll say this, Nicolai's only lost 4 times. Every one of them is a standing knockout or TKO. So if he does win, Almabaev, theoretically, it's by knockout. And the other basis for the prediction here is that Mateusz Nicolai has excellent takedown defense. I'm not saying he can stuff every takedown of Almabaev's, but there is at least a chance, a decent chance, that he removes that whole world of offense from this matchup. So if he's able to keep himself safe with his chin and keep the fight standing, removing Almabaev's whole world of offense, I think it's a much more winnable fight for Mateusz Nicolai, and that's the fight I envision. It's not a lock by any means, but I think he makes it a lot easier here. Stylistically, I think it's just a lot easier here. But Nicolai on the feet, he's a very effective counter striker. He's not always the most active guy, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him win this fight, despite putting up fewer numbers and being outstruck on paper. But he's a really good counter striker. He's fine on the back foot, patiently waiting, and he's got some pop in his punches too, Mateusz Nicolai. He can definitely crack, and I'm not just saying that because he knocked out Matt Schnell, who's got an even worse chin than he does. But Nicolai is also an excellent grappler as well, and I think if he's able to take away the wrestling of Almabaev, maybe he can take over in that department. That is the one way that Almabaev has lost that I've seen anyway. He's got 2 losses, one by tight decision, I haven't seen that, and one by TKO to Tagir Ulanbekov, who's in the UFC. Tagir was able to suck some of the life out of him, slow him down, and in getting on top of him in round 2, and then in round 3, it was too much for him, and he was able to put him away down the stretch. That's very forgivable because of the way he lost and also who he lost to. Tagir's an excellent fighter, but yeah, he was beaten on the ground. And that last loss came many years ago, 7 years ago at this point. But since then, he's looked incredible. He's been undefeated. He's been tested a few times, but he's passed every test. He had a tough fight with former UFC fighter Zach Makovsky that went to a split decision. Zach was a famously tough test for a lot of good fighters in his day and really tough to dominate. And he made it a good battle. Almabaev was able to take Zach Makovsky down, but Zach was reversing him and finding himself in the full mount at the end of the first few rounds and made it a good battle. And also, he fought Chris Kalidas, former UFC fighter, in a 5-round decision. And he won the 5-round decision, but he was dropped. So that can happen as well. And I think, look, there's not a lot going against him. You could look at his record and say, how could you pick anybody to even beat him by a tight decision. He's got so much momentum. But I think against Mateus Nicolau, Almabaev is, if the fight goes the way I think it will, Almabaev will be more active and he will be faster, but he's not going to be as effective on the outside striking with somebody like Mateus Nicolau. I know Nicolau, if you do reach him, he's maybe an easier guy to knock out, of course, but he's tougher to reach in the first place. And we've seen his style give trouble to a lot of great fighters, most famously Manel Kopp, who he beat by a pretty tight decision. But yeah, Almabaev, he's got a very high ceiling, just like a Manel Kopp. Wouldn't surprise me if he was the win, but I'm picking against him here. I think Mateus Nicolau has a much more favorable matchup than maybe the odds makers realize here. And not that I think it's favorable in that he's going to win, but it's not unfavorable in a way that a lot of other matchups are. Again, naturally, I think his chin is a little safer here, and I think his takedown defense makes it a lot more difficult for Almabaev to win. So I don't expect anybody to be on cruise control here. I think it'll be a fight mostly contested on the feet and pretty close. But I've got Mateus Nicolau scoring the points. And if he can get on top of Almabaev, which he's got well-rounded skills, Nicolau, that is a possibility for him. He's the bigger man, and that'd probably be the easiest path to victory for him in this matchup. But I bet on Nicolau because he's an underdog. Not a lot because, again, I don't have a lot of faith in this matchup. And I will wait for the props. I'm interested in seeing what Almabaev via knockout looks like. Again, I just talked about how I don't think it'll happen. Doesn't mean I won't fucking bet on it because I am a degenerate. Next up, we have Daniel Pineda versus Darren Elkins. My prediction for this fight is Darren Elkins wins by decision. The basis for the prediction is that he's the toughest guy on the planet, and that always helps in a fist fight. But the technical basis is I think he survives round one from Daniel Pineda and then takes over with his wrestling and his cardio and his overall work rate. Darren Elkins is a fucking hustler, and I think if these guys find themselves in a fast-paced fight, Darren Elkins is going to pull away with this one. Daniel Pineda, though, is incredibly dangerous. He's the most dangerous guy in MMA. I know you're going to say this guy's that hit harder and much better submission artist and whatever, but put it all together, and you're not going to find anybody who's got 28 finishes and 28 victories. That is exceptional. That would be crazy for somebody who fought only on the regional scene, let alone somebody who's been in the UFC. Pineda was in the UFC in his first stint like 13 years ago or something like that. So he's been around fighting great competition for a while, and he's never won a decision. And I have to mention he's also got 2 wins over excellent fighters that he both finished in one round in one night. And they don't count because he tested positive for whatever the fuck. Probably shouldn't have brought that up, I guess. But yeah, the danger is there for Pineda. And I do think he would get the first knockout between the two of them. And he's much more of a submission threat, to be honest, Pineda. But I do think going for submissions against Elkins will get him in trouble. That's just my hunch. I think as good as Daniel Pineda's guillotine is and his Kimura and whatever else, if he's going for these things, he's going to leave himself open to being countered and having his back taken. Especially if he goes reaching for Kimuras with Darren Elkins. But Elkins, look, he's been... I'll go over their losses now. Elkins has been only submitted once, and it was to Charles Oliveira. That is incredibly forgivable. And, of course, that was over a decade ago as well. So Elkins, he's going to be really tough to get out of there. Pineda's potently dangerous, and he's got incredible submission skills, so it is possible. But still, I favor Elkins to survive those submission attempts and win the positional battle. And as for getting knocked out goes, look, Darren Elkins, his chin has failed him once, really, and that was against Chad Mendes, although he had this loss to Ted Worthington where he got clipped early. But his other TKO losses are to Cub Swanson and Ricardo Lamas. Lamas beat him down over the course of 15 minutes and got him out of there in the 15th minute, I believe. And Cub Swanson was firing on all cylinders. And I mean, there's no other way around it. He just looked incredible, and he had too much for Elkins on the feet. Elkins didn't go down, or he didn't go out anyway. He kind of flopped around a little bit, but he was just getting his ass kicked, and it was like a mercy stoppage. But those are the times he's been finished. Every other loss of his has been by decision. And look, Daniel Pineda does hit hard enough to knock him out, but I don't think that's going to happen. And I know Elkins isn't going to quit. I doubt Pineda's going to get on top of Elkins and beat him down like Lamas did. That's not a path to victory. I really think Pineda's primary path to victory is catching Elkins early. But I've got Elkins surviving, and I've got Elkins outlasting him. As for finishing Pineda, that's going to be pretty tough to do. Pineda has been TKO'd twice, really, legitimately, and they were both knockout losses. Cub Swanson, who knocked out Elkins, knocked out Pineda in round 2, and that was much more of a clean knockout. And same goes for Antonio Carvalho, who knocked out Pineda in his first UFC stint. And the irony there is that 6 months later or whatever, Elkins got his only standing knockout over Antonio Carvalho. Rocked him and then put him away. But yeah, that's how Pineda's been defeated with strikes. And as for his submission losses, he's got 6 of them, but all 6 of them are over 14 years ago, which they may as well have never even happened. And it looks like, oh, this guy's so submittable. It might be more accurate to say he's impossible to submit these days, because those 6 losses, again, they're all over 14 years ago, and the last 2 of which are both knee bars to Chaz Skelly, former UFC fighter. So yeah, Pineda's going to be very tough to get out of there, but Elkins, I think his really only chance of a finish, whether it's TKO or submission, it is round 3. It's sucking the life out of Daniel Pineda, and Elkins exploiting a big cardio disadvantage there, or cardio advantage that he has, and putting Pineda away. Elkins has refined his finishing skills over the years, and they typically hit the surface in rounds 2 or 3 when his opponent is tired. But yeah, he's been solid at closing the show, closing the deal there. But I still don't think that's going to happen against Pineda. Again, no one's been able to get him out of there in years and years, a decade and a half. And Elkins, I think, top position is his best course to victory, and that's him winning a decision. So I'm going with Darren Elkins, but oh yeah, this would be a good time to mention he broke his leg. He broke his leg a year ago in 2 places, whatever they are, the fibulus and the nebulus, the 2 bones or whatever. I believe he had fractures in both of them, and somehow he put himself back together, and within a year, because his last fight was less than a year ago, or about a year ago, but within a year of the injury, he's back. He went through a camp. I probably went through hell in camp, knowing how hard that guy works. And I'm assuming he's ready to go and he's healthy. And I'm assuming his leg is fine and he'll be taking shots and running Pineda into the cage and on the ground, hopefully. So I'm going with Darren Elkins, and in full disclosure, he is my favorite fighter. He and Jim Miller. I try not to let that cloud my judgment, even though I picked Jim Miller to beat Bobby Green, so I'm a jerk off. But here I do favor Elkins to win, even without my bias. I think Daniel Pineda, as dangerous as he is, you take away that danger, and his cardio and the wrestling and the whole thing can't keep up with Darren Elkins. Elkins by decision is the pick. I bet on Elkins, and I'll wait for the props. And despite me saying all that shit about durability and survivability and whatever, I'll be sprinkling money on finishes. Next up, we have Brady Hiestsnd versus Jake Hadley. My prediction for this fight is Brady Hiestsnd wins. And I'll go with him winning by decision, but I'll probably waste some money on him winning by finish down the stretch. Because he is coming off of 2 round 3 finishes over Garrett Armfield and Dana Bakiri. Neither one of those wins was easy, especially the Dana fight. But Brady Hiestsnd dug deep and made it happen in both those victories. And I think that's a testament to his cardio, which I consider to be awesome. And I wasn't sure about that a few years ago when he got into the UFC, because he had that tough fight against Ricky Tercios, really close fight in their Ultimate Fighter finale, which was awesome. And his other loss came before that to Chad Anheliger, the walking comeback. Chad got him out of there in round 3, but I do know Brady took that fight on very short notice, maybe a week's notice or something like that. So it wasn't perfect for him. He stepped up and wasn't able to last. And I believe he was doing well early. But he's definitely still developing as a fighter. Even now, he's only 25 years old. And I think he's got a lot of good experience so far. He's been in the UFC already for 3 years. And yeah, there's no real major weakness of Brady Hiestsnd. He was out hustled by Ricky Tercios, but that was a fight he still could have won. And I should mention he was knocked out as a kid, 17 in 2017. So he was 18 years old, maybe, or whatever. But just know that I know it happened. But I'm picking him to beat Jake Hadley, even though I do think there's a chance Jake is able to keep this fight standing, take away that whole world of offense. But Jake's been taken down enough where I consider Brady Hiestsnd good enough to get it done. Brady is relentless. He will shoot 100 shots, and that's really the reason I'm picking him to win here, because I do think Jake will be able to thwart many takedown attempts. But Jake has been taken down. That's how he's lost his losses. Cody Durden, Alan Nascimento, Charles Johnson, not so much. But still, the best way to beat Jake Hadley is to pin him and get on top of him. Even Mitch Raposo, when they fought on the Contender Series a few years ago, was able to get on top of him. And I just think Brady, with how relentless he is, he'll be able to figure out a way to get it done. Once he does so, look, I don't know if anybody can finish Jake because no one's finished him yet, but Brady Hiestsnd is a guy that drowns you. And I do think his chances of getting a finish will go up as the fight goes on, especially if he's got that top control. You know, kind of like Grant Dawson versus Rafa Garcia the other day. It starts off and it's a 10-9 round, but when you're that good and that dominant on top, the finishes will open up. But Jake Hadley, look, he looked incredible against Calvin Loughran. That surprised me. He took on Calvin Loughran, moved up in weight, and took the fight on short notice. Maybe from a position of desperation because he was coming off of 2 consecutive losses. But he looked really good in that fight. And that guy Calvin Loughran, he's definitely not as fast and as refined of a grappler as Brady Hiestsnd, but he's a big, strong guy, bigger and stronger. And Jake didn't let him bully him around. Jake, yeah, he's got 3 losses. He's never been finished. Charles Johnson, Cody Durden, and Alan Nascimento. So there's no obvious weakness to Jake Hadley, the weak chin, the weak body, whatever. And Jake is a very well-rounded guy. He's got 3 knockouts and 5 submissions. But yeah, he's a well-rounded guy, and I think the big advantage he'd have here would be on the feet against Brady. Brady's striking, I'm sure it's coming along. Again, he's 25 years old and in the gym every day. But Jake Hadley is better than him on the feet. And I think Jake would render him sloppy and uncomfortable and desperate on the feet. So he's got a definite kickboxing advantage, but Brady Hiestsnd has a grappling advantage. It's going one way or the other, and I've got Brady Hiestsnd winning this fight. I think he'll be coming in tip-top shape. He'll be able to put it all together and figure out a way to take Jake down. And then I think that wins him the fight, whether he slows the fight down or speeds it up and looks for a finish. The prediction is he gets a decision, Brady Hiestsnd by decision. But of course, when the props drop, I'll probably be throwing sprinkles on some finishes. Next up, we have Madaerji versus Charles Johnson. My prediction for this fight is Madaerji wins by decision. And the basis for the prediction is that I don't think Charles Johnson is the most likely candidate to exploit the ground game of Madaerji. Although, bet your bottom dollar, I'll be betting on him winning by submission, no doubt, unless the odds are way off. But I think Madaerji's record doesn't lie. He's got 6 losses. All 6 of them are by submission. And I cashed in on the last few of them just because I trust it so much as a trade. But I have to mention 3 of those 6 submission losses are technical subs, so he didn't tap. And in general, I think he's very tough and has a lot of resilience, but the technical grappling skills are not up to par with all of his traits. Still, I'm picking Madaerji to win because I think on the feet, he can thwart Charles Johnson with his power. Not that he's going to knock Charles out. In fact, I'm counting on him not knocking Charles out. But I still think his power can be the story of the fight, even if he doesn't even knock him down. I think that straight left is the best punch either guy has, and it's for Madaerji. And I think here he's fighting a guy who is not likely to exploit that whole realm of defense that he is lacking, Madaerji. And I think on the feet, even though Charles can still win this fight, because he's the guy that, to be honest, I trust more with his cardio and work rate and the rest of it. But he's still fighting a guy who's got him outgunned with power and a guy who has never lost that type of fight or any type of fight but getting submitted. He never lost by decision where, he was out wrestled like this guy or that guy. And he was never, of course, finished in any way and especially knocked out, which is relevant here because Madaerji's got 13 of his 16 wins being by knockout. But yeah, assuming Charles is able to stand up to his danger on the feet and assuming he's not able to take it to the ground, I've got Madaerji winning a decision. I am counting on the toughness of Charles. Again, just go watch his fight with Brandon Royval in the LFA. That was the closest he's ever come to getting finished, but he is rock solid. And as potently dangerous as Madaerji is, I'd be very surprised if he was the first person to finish Charles Johnson. So yeah, I've got him getting the better of Charles on the feet for the 15 minutes and winning a tight decision. That's the prediction. I will bet on it. I have bet on Madaerji. I will look to bet on him winning by decision because as dangerous as he is, I consider that his primary path to victory. Nothing, and if it's close enough, I'll just stick with the money line. But on the flip side, I will look to waste money on Charles Johnson winning by submission. Again, unless they're onto it, and those odds aren't worth it at all. But I think for a guy that doesn't get too many subs here, it's still probably his most likely path to victory in this matchup, considering his opponent. So yeah, there will be props played, but right now with no props, I've got Madaerji, and I've got him winning by decision. Up next, we have Rob Font versus Kyler Phillips. My prediction for this fight is Kyler Phillips wins a decision. I'd love for Rob Font to win, but I've got to go with Kyler Phillips here. I think, first of all, I am picking decision, but I do think if either guy was to get finished, it would be Rob Font, even though he's historically been very durable. He's only got 1 loss in which he was finished, and that was the super guillotine of Pedro Munoz. And that's the last guy that Kyler Phillips beat, by the way. Not that that has much to do with it. But also, Rob Font is the guy who's been hurt a bunch in his last 5 fights, mostly in the Cheeto Vera fight, where he was really hurt in every round pretty much, but also against Aldo. And, of course, he is the older guy. He's 37 years old as opposed to 29-year-old Phillips. So, yeah, athletically, shut that off. Athletically, things are trending in one direction. But I have to say, Rob Font, he's got 4 losses in his last 5 fights. His last 2 losses were decisions to Davison Figueiredo and Corey Sandhagen. And he wasn't really beaten up there, but he was, definitely neutralized and outpointed. And his 2 losses before that are to Cheeto Vera and Aljo. And I have to say, in both those fights, if you look at the numbers anyway, Rob Font was doing well with his jab and the points battle. but he got hurt too much in those fights and allowed the tide to turn. And that's pretty much the reason he lost, despite making it all 25 minutes. He had a lot of big moments going against him. So I think his striking is better than it looks on paper, with those losses. And of course, mixed in there is a knockout win over Adrian Yanez, which was fantastic and a pretty big upset. But yeah, I do think Rob Font is at this point maybe a little underrated just because of the fights he's had lately. But I still think he's slower than Kyler Phillips. I still think Kyler Phillips moves really well where, he can take away that jab. Not completely, of course. It's the jab. But I still think he won't make it the story of the fight. And I think Kyler Phillips is a well-rounded guy who's firing on all cylinders, and I've got him winning this fight, whether it's on the feet or on the ground. I don't think either guy really is the most willing grappler, but I think Kyler Phillips has a little more jiu-jitsu going on. Still, this is a fight that on the ground could be won by top position for either guy, and it is a 3-round fight, so it only takes 2 takedowns. And you know what? The fight could really change there, but I still think it's going to be mostly contested on the feet. And I've got Kyler Phillips winning this fight by decision. Phillips has only lost twice, and they're both really close fights. And the story of each loss was cardio. He lost to Victor Henry outside the UFC, who of course is inside the UFC now. And he lost in one of his earlier UFC fights to Raulian Paiva. And that was a really close fight, but definitely Kyler wasn't able to close the show and faded a little bit, and that's what led to the loss. Although you could argue it should have been a draw for sure. But yeah, I mean, those are his losses. So he's obviously never been finished, and I consider him a really tough guy. Oh, I have to mention he lost on in an exhibition fight to Brad Katona. I mentioned it during the Brad video, and may as well mention it here. That was on the Ultimate Fighter quarterfinals or whatever. But yeah, Kyler Phillips, he's firing on all cylinders. He's got 3 consecutive wins since then. First one was a triangle armbar in round 3 over Marcelo Rojo, which was impressive because, kind of, I don't want to say it alleviates all the concerns about his cardio, but getting that 3rd round finish is nice, even if Marcelo Rojo loses all of his fights via round 3 finish. And then his last 2 fights were clean victories over Raoni Barcelos and the aforementioned Pedro Munoz. So he's got a lot of momentum. He's beaten some really good fighters. And of course, his last win, I should mention, before losing to Raulian Paiva, was a great decision over Song Yadong, which still might be his best victory today. Although, I don't know. He's got a lot of good ones. But yeah, Kyler Phillips, I think if he needs to be tested, he's going to be really tough, and he'll be able to stand up to the danger of Rob Font and the power, because Rob Font, I think it's been forgotten, but he's got some good pop in his punches. And I think Kyler will be the more agile fighter, the better footwork, and able to keep himself out of being jabbed up here. And he's the more diverse striker, and probably the more dangerous guy at this point as well. Or at least I expect his danger to be more of a factor, considering 37-year-old Rob Font, who's been knocked around lately. So I think Kyler should win this fight. I've got him winning on points in mostly a stand-up bout, and I do think it would be small moments that win him the fight, but if there are any big moments, those also go to Kyler Phillips as well. So I've got Kyler Phillips winning by decision. That is the pick, and I have not bet on him, just couldn't muster up the courage yet. I don't know. I'll see what the props look like. I would strongly favor decision for him just because of Rob Font's durability throughout the years. But again, they're separated by 8 years and things are trending one way. So I don't know. Kyler Phillips by decision is the pick. And in the main event of the evening, we have Anthony Fluffy Hernandez versus Michel Pereira. My prediction for this fight, and it pains me to say it, is Michel Pereira wins by knockout. And when I say knockout, I mean body shot. I've got him winning with a body shot. And if that is my prediction, I may as well go with round 1, because that would make the most sense. Having said that, if This fight gets out of round one in the first place, regardless of how it looks. I think it's a big plus for Anthony Fluffy Hernandez because he has incredible cardio. Or if Anthony Hernandez can take down Michel Pereira. If he takes him down early, especially, but really at any point in this fight, I think it's a big plus for him. Taking him down early, of course, would take away all that pep in the step of Michel, and that'd be a big plus. But even taking him down in round two or round three, if the fight should get there, I think it means a lot for Anthony Fluffy Hernandez because his wrestling does not slow down. And unlike other relentless wrestlers like Mateusz Gamrot and Marab and Colby Covington, Fluffy is a finisher. He's a bona fide finisher. He weaponizes his cardio to fatigue you and to close the show on the ground with his typically superior ground skills. Although, as he showed against Rodolfo Vieira, he doesn't need to be superior on the ground to finish you on the ground. And I think Fluffy Hernandez, the second prediction, I think if I'm wrong and Michel Pereira doesn't get him out of there early, I think Anthony Fluffy Hernandez gets him out of there in the middle of the fight. And look, Michel Pereira is very tough to get out of there. He's had 11 losses throughout a very long career, and he's only ever been finished once by knockout and once by submission. The submission comes way back in his first loss, I believe, 10 years ago, one of his first few losses. And the only time he was TKO'd was a year before coming to the UFC when Dusko Todorovic got him out of there. Dusko kind of came and went in the UFC. Actually, I think he's still in the UFC. He is. But either way, it's not the best loss, but it's the only time he's been stopped. So without calling it a fluke or whatever, I'll just say that Michel Pereira is typically very durable. And I have to mention his cardio collapse against Tristan Connolly. He lost one fight in the UFC legitimately. His next fight was a DQ loss against Diego Sanchez, but whatever. But Tristan Connolly came up very, very short notice. He's a 145 pounder, and he ended up taking this fight against Michel at 170. And it was just an incredible upset. One of my favorite moments of whatever that year was, 2019, 2020, because it was just an awesome story and a really big upset. Tristan Connolly did have to outlast Michel Pereira, who was doing his capoeira Ringling Brothers circus act in the first round. And then he slowed down in a big way. And Tristan, who's very durable and a crafty fighter, was able to get on top of him, slowed Michel Pereira down, and outlasted him to win a tight decision. It wasn't like he got the shit kicked out of him, but he lost the fight to a guy he definitely should not have lost to, and he kind of threw the fight away. Some bad decision making and awful cardio to back it all up. So even though he's done nothing but win since then, that loss has stuck with me. It was a glaring loss there. But look, since then he's been whatever fucking 10-0 or whatever in the UFC. He's got so much momentum. And even though he steamrolled everybody he's fought at middleweight, at welterweight he had a lot of good long battles. His first win on this winning streak was actually a submission with 20 seconds left in the fight against the guy Madaerji. That's not enough to erase cardio concerns, but it is a great look. And then after that, he had 4 consecutive decision victories, some really good battles against Chaos Williams, Santiago Ponzinibbio, and then Nico Price and Andre Fialho. So yeah, it's not like cardio is a guaranteed weakness of Michel Pereira. It's just something we have seen in the past, we've seen in the UFC, and considering the traits of his opponent, Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, I think it's back on the table in this matchup, the cardio of Michel Pereira, because Fluffy will not stop. But Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, let me address his weaknesses here. His major weakness is his body, I'd say. He's only got 2 losses, one by knockout, one by submission, and you could blame his body on both losses. Marcus Perez ended up getting him out of there with an anaconda choke, and Kevin Holland just straight up kneed him in the body in 20 seconds. But again, Perez, he finished it with an anaconda choke, but it was definitely the body shot that got the ball rolling, and it stands to reason that there's at least something there. It's a potential weakness, if not a definitive weakness. And I think Michel Pereira is the perfect guy to exploit that weakness. His wrestling defense, his takedown defense, and his athleticism, and he does mix it up to the body as well. It's not like he's a guy who's never thrown body shots. He's a deadly guy, and he's a guy whose body shots could have gotten him victories as of late, but he got his own submissions. So yeah, I think this is a very interesting contrast of styles. I think both guys are versatile fighters, but this is pretty much a striker versus grappler as far as I'm concerned. And I'm going with the striker here. I trust his takedown defense, and I think his physicality is there for him at middleweight, where he's a tough guy to reach in the first place and get inside of because he's so athletic, and he's even faster at middleweight, obviously, fighting these bigger guys. But if you do get inside on him, he is incredibly physically strong, Michel Pereira. I don't think he's the easiest guy to take down, and I think he's probably stronger than light heavyweights, even though he was fighting at 171 not long ago. So yeah, the pick is Michel Pereira gets a knockout with a body shot, and I'll go with that happening in round one because it makes the most sense. I bet on Pereira because he's an underdog, but this is one where I'm going to wait for the props because I think the props, there's definitely going to be uh, some props that produce a profit here. I'm very sure if Pineda wins, it is by knockout and it's early. And while Fluffy Hernandez, I couldn't tell you if I'd favor submission or TKO or whatever, but I do think he weaponizes his cardio. And if he wins, it's him forcing a stoppage on the ground in the middle of the fight. So that's the assessment, but the prediction again is Michel Pereira via body shot knockout, and let's go with round one. Like, share, subscribe, all that horse shit, and check out my other videos.